It's spooky season, everyone, so it's time to settle down and talk about some horror. Hey everyone, I hope you're well, playing on and making the games that you all love. You're joining me, your host, Principal Mission Designer, Max Paz. Absolute pleasure to be here with you, and I hope that your loved ones are safe, and that you have a good evening, morning, or night. You can hear me yawn, it's almost bedtime where I am while recording this, but I wanted to get this one done. I've just finished a small business trip, which was great fun, but a lot to do. And never enough time. As you can see, I even look a little bit disheveled. And for those of you who are listening audio-wise, just know I'm still as ugly as ever. No change there. But yeah, the thing that I'm really interested in talking about was a horror game for this. As we know, it's spooky season. Hopefully this will be out before the end of the month, I'm hoping. And yeah, I just wanted to go through a very interesting one, I thought, to me. I've seen it get very mixed opinions online. Most people will be expecting to talk about Silent Hill 2 because I'm a huge fan of the original, and I'm really happy for the Blooper team, the remake for it. It's always great to see, and I think that, to me, it was just also must have been vindicating for them because they got a lot of hate and complaints when no one had even played the game, and it's the hard aspect of marketing, right? Where you're marketing the game, but you can never play it, you know what I mean? So it was very much a... Sorry guys, I'm also annoyed that the hairdresser really my haircut, so I'm a little bit about that, but yeah, I keep forgetting I've got that swear button. We should put that in there more. But yeah, the big element for it, yeah, so really happy for them. Marketing's always complex, and just to see them and it be vindicated is fantastic news. And I think it's really important as well, especially if you're a European developer, that we have more studios doing well in Europe, especially right now. We know for the last, I want to say 2 years now, it's been a lot more trying times with that of, studios going under, and especially feeling like now I feel like most of the big games are only coming from America, sadly, at the moment. It's also a lot more of a place that encourages restarting and starting your own company compared to most of Europe, so it's great to see that. But first, let's have a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than me. What I've done, everyone, and I hope you're excited for this, is I've actually created a level design kind of store. What I've done in this store is put up different kinds of tips and tricks that you can find there, whether that be my actual ebook itself, to that of level design pamphlets focused on different things such as traversal, stealth, breaking into the industry, as well as different talks that I have done which you cannot find anywhere else other than on this store. So if you are looking to improve on your level design skills and processes, then check out the Level Design Store, which will be down in the description below, where there'll be a link to find this. All you need to do is head over to gumroad.com/level design lobby. I hope you like what you see, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you, and now back to the show. Yeah, but it is not Silent Hill 2 that I want to talk about. I actually want to talk about an earlier installment that came out this year, which was that of Silent Hill: The Short Message. Now, online you'll see, a lot of people talking about, someone's called it the embarrassment. It's not a true Silent Hill installment and stuff. But there's also a lot of other complimentary videos out there for it. And so I had the chance to play it. Completed it. I even convinced my brother and his wife to play it, and they enjoyed it to a degree. And I think this is something I really want to discuss about this game, is the elements of, you can see so much inspiration from so many different Silent Hill games, and the execution is not necessarily as flawless or as perfect as its inspirations, but you can see that it's almost there. And I think it's a really interesting one worth talking about from a couple of different perspective. So I'm hoping you'll engage me in this episode, kind of talking about it. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of the Silent Hill IP itself, right? Because last year I think there was another Silent Hill Ascensions, which I think came out roughly about a year ago, right? So it's a very different one, kind of an interactive mobile one. And I think the first thing to kind of talk about with Silent Hill as an IP is kind of how it's kind of done by many different developers compared to when you think about Resident Evil, right? Resident Evil, again, many different ones. But for the most part, I know there are some exceptions, but for the most part, it's done in-house by Capcom. Now, as we know, Konami kind of took a step back from all of the game development. There was a lot of, I guess, public spat, as we all know, between Kojima and Konami, and them not necessarily wanting to be involved with games. PT as well for it. I do not know anything about that. Let's just make that bit very clear. I'm just talking about that kind of timeline from there. And what you may not be aware of, and we're especially seeing it a lot more, is obviously more and more co-dev studios, but there's a lot of different ways that works, right? Co-dev can mean that of a team joining and aiding that of another team to see something through to the finish line. You'll see a lot of that nowadays, and I think we're going to see even more of that as time continues. We also see something where a team like that can pitch to a publisher or an IP owner like Konami an idea and then be able to use it. Now, what was fascinating after I finished the short message, they went on to talk about in the behind the scenes stuff how they originally had pitched to do the Silent Hill 2 remake. And that was a Japanese studio, so I'm quite surprised they picked Blooper over them, right? And it didn't work out, but then Konami says we're still interested in working with you on a Silent Hill IP. Now, the game itself is roughly about between, I think it's about 2 to 4 hours. It's a short game, right? Depending again on skill levels. And I think that's super fascinating as well. So what I think we can all assume is the budget's probably not the biggest in terms of AAA. And I think that is something, again, to keep in mind, which I find quite fascinating for it. And in that, they decided to tackle, I think, a very important subject. And now, I don't know what the actual rates are, but they talk a lot about spoilers for anyone as well. And there is going to be some sensitive subjects, so just know that I'll be trying to talk about them as best I can with the most respect that I can. Is that of teen suicide and bullying, right? Especially towards that of young female teenagers. There is also some touching on the subjects of abusive parents and harassment from parents in a very disgusting nature. So the topics are a lot more closer to, shall we say, reality than most in terms of horror games, right? And I think what I loved about this, and we talked about how they took a lot of inspiration from other entries into this franchise, is they're touching on subjects which are close to home. And I love some of their designs for it, right? Like, when you think about bullying, obviously it's changed the landscape into that of social media. We're always logged on, we're always online, this sort of thing. But what I liked about it is there's a whole hallway, right, where you have post-it notes of it, where there are elements of these notes calling the characters fat, ugly, and really horrid words and elements there. But that's all around them on the walls. And the reason that I love that is solely because the element of that it's inescapable, right? Like that it is something that, love is wrong, but I'm loving the mechanical representation, not the love of bullying. But it's in that of a very fascinating way that it's always around you. So if the player stops and looks, they'll start to see them for it. And there's even a moment when the player goes into that of a memory and they see that of these faceless bullies constantly saying horrid things. And I, again, really appreciate how they were trying to represent it. But the interesting aspect from this is, again, is I don't actually know if it delivers it. Now, speaking to my sister-in-law, and she very much said that the element of that she was a fan of the subject matter and thought it was very important, but it didn't necessarily hit fully home for her. And I think that's such an important aspect, right? Like, how do we make this better? And I think this is part of the reason why I really wanted to talk about and really look at this game, because the aspects are so important in terms of cultural importance, but yet they've not necessarily landed. And this isn't criticism for it. This is me trying to always understand and learn why. And I think it's important to look at it for it. Because the next thing that I want to talk about is if we look again at Silent Hill 2. There's a really interesting conversation with Seb McBride. He's been on the show, good friend, senior level designer at CD Projekt Red. And when we had, it was one night where we were all over watching the UFC, and one of our other LD mates, Nori, had said that he hadn't played Silent Hill 2. And both me and Seb, oh, you should play it, it's really, really good. But Seb had said something very interesting. He believed that Silent Hill 2 wasn't a relatable story. And I was fascinated about how he came to that conclusion. Because when I look at Resident Evil 2, it's not a relatable story in terms of, like, all of us are going to walk into that of a zombie-infested city, right? Trying to find a way to survive. But Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 1 especially, I haven't played some of the more recent titles, so maybe others can inform me if there are others, but they really hit close to an actual subject that sadly many of us face, and may not be identical ways, but definitely in terms of loss, right? Silent Hill 2 is huge because it's a man dealing with the loss of his significant other, a loss of her and the chance of possibly being reunited with her, but also again then facing the realities of who he was during her sickness and illness. And Silent Hill 1 is losing a child and trying to get that child back. So for them to focus again on such a real life subject, I think again comes into that Silent Hill IP, and especially one that I think is very prevalent. And I think many of us have experienced some form of bullying. If not, I imagine many parents out there are very scared or worried about how to protect from bullying. Again, there was a big study on, with the advent of social media, how hard it is to log off from bullying, right? Like, in the days before social media, you could sadly be bullied, but go home and have a safe haven from it. Nowadays, if you go onto your social media, you can still get bullied. So how do you escape that? And I think as well it shows, and again, spoilers on this, that you as the character were also the root of some bullying. And I think that's really important as well, because I think, again, another aspect is we've all been guilty of saying something mean to someone. And it's not a nice thing to do. It's not a nice feeling when you realize you've done it as well. But the shame with that, in terms of the mechanical wise, is it kind of comes through a cutscene versus like you interacting and you doing it. And I think that would have been a bit more of a powerful moment. And I absolutely love that, again, it's tackling that and how do we do it. So I wonder, I'm going to ask this question to you, we're going to continue on in a second, but like, how do you think you would represent your character being a bully? How do you think you'd do that? Is it an interaction prompt? Is it that of a choice in that of a conversation wheel? Is it that of a mechanic itself for it, in terms of like, how is the mechanic working? Is it that of pushing someone? You know, bullying can come in many different forms. Is it you sending that text message? And I think that would have worked a little bit more interesting for, I think it's a nice little revelation, the narrative twist of it. But I think, and I was like, oh, this is a shame. And it worked well then. But I think the element for it is it needs to come, again, showing it in not necessarily the best light. Now, the other aspect I was really interested in is it went in first-person mode, this game did. And you can tell a lot it's taken from PT and Silent Hill 2. When we talk about the more realistic stories, in terms of them hitting much closer to home. I think the other aspect that it comes on with is the big villain, per se. We're obviously all very familiar with Pyramid Head, one of the most iconic villains in video game lore. But in this one they had, I think it was like Cherry Blossom Head. It's literally called that or something. But I liked the idea of it. I just think the difference between Silent Hill 2, it was Pyramid Head, and this one is, again, a little bit of the introduction. You instantly run from this character. You never really see it doing anything except chasing you, and you can't really view it for too long. And because, yeah, like, the representation of the cherry blossom comes from that of one of the girls' art, per se, right? But cherry blossoms aren't necessarily a disturbing thing. Now we've seen that of Flowers and Overgrown turn into something more horrific in terms of that of Last of Us, and I think it was called Annihilation. It was a Netflix film but with the girl who played Jane Foster from Thor. Please put her name in the comments, as I've completely forgotten. But yeah, starring her, so we've seen it go in a much more horrific way and manner, right? This one, compared to Pyramid Head, when you first see Pyramid Head, which is kind of committing, again, a very unspeakable act on another monster, this one doesn't have that much of an impact, right? Like, if it was the bully itself, I think that would have been a bit more interesting. It doesn't kill you as soon as it touches you, but maybe it bullies you per se. Like, it's when it's chasing you, it's saying, calling you names, getting closer, right? For it, maybe it is. I mean, there's other forms of bullying, you know, like a big American stereotype in the films is obviously that of swirlies or wedgies. And you're probably not going to necessarily do that because, again, that's more of a male bullying than a female. But there's definitely things we can do with that for it. So I think, although it has a very similar iconic villain per se, it doesn't necessarily deliver on it. And I think that's, again, another thing that's worth looking at, is it's taken the inspirations, but it's not made it its own. Now, it's hard to do that. I honestly don't know if picking something like Pyramid Head is the right move. I don't think it's a bad move per se, but it's more of when you've got such an iconic character and you're trying to do something similar, especially such passionate fans of any fan base, it can be hard where people don't feel it as a gimmick, being a rip-off in other ways. So again, what could you have done to spice that up, I think, is a really fascinating question. The other second thing for it was that of, to me anyway, was that, like I said, we talked about first person similar to PT. Now, PT is very much a masterclass in its own right, like, Jesus Christ. I think I did a whole episode, no, maybe I didn't. But I remember playing it, I remember being just blown away by it, and it has definitely made me go, if I was ever in a creative director position for, say, something like E3, sadly gone, but whatever the next big conference where all trailers are released, I don't know if I'd do a trailer. I'd probably try do something like PT. Now, again, it comes at a much, much bigger cost and also could cause a lot of thrown away work. But I think the impact of it showed how important. We talked about Silent Hill 2 kind of suffering from a lot of people assuming, never assume, because you make an ass of you and me. Remember that one, kids. But from that, you can kind of get the element of actually what is the game, right? And I think that's a really important one for it. So yeah, I think with it being first person, it definitely kind of lent into it. But I will say, I think the level design, because you're kind of re-exploring the same space, it didn't have enough of a local landmarks or helping with the mental map. Now, you can argue you don't need that because it's a horror game, so it's kind of like The Shining. When you actually look at The Shining's hotel, it doesn't make any architectural sense, and that's part of the reason, is to throw you off so you can't really connect things, or if you do connect them, it doesn't make sense. And it's kind of that more uncanny valley, and I don't mean in terms of facial features, I mean it more in the sense of, like, this looks like a place, but it's not. Like, this room is a room, or we can make something look like it, but it's not. You know what I mean? I hope you know what I mean. But I think that is, again, just something where the level design could have benefited from a bit more of a deeper dive with it, either leaning into the disconnection or the distortion each time you visit it. There are some elements of it, but it's not as deep as I would have. Again, it's easy for me to say this when I am here on the sidelines not working on the project, because we mentioned earlier that it's a short game. I imagine the budget was really tight, same with the delivery deadlines as well. There is some great interview with the creators, developers. There's a good one on the level design for it, which I just recommend for it. The design director, level design director, seems like she's a huge fan of Silent Hill and very, very passionate about level design as well, so a huge amount of respect. As I said, though, it would be interesting to see what's the right call on it, right? Like, PT's horror is that of the constant loop. No matter what, you're not making progress. Silent Hill 2 is like the warping of a space that you think you know, and it's no longer that space. Or, again, as we talked about, it looks like the space, but actually isn't. I think that's an interesting one for it. I think the other interesting point was there's a lot of live action characters and that kind of put in here. It's a very cutscene heavy game. I think that would have been something I definitely would have tweaked, is how do we tell the story without as much cutscenes? But the big one about you understand your character's family life was really well done in terms of environmental storytelling. That was really, really well done. But I think what I would have pushed further on, or wish they would have pushed further. And again, I'm talking a lot, I know I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm really talking about this because I really like the game, and I understand why people aren't necessarily like buzzing or giving it rave reviews. It isn't the greatest game ever, but you can so clearly see the design intentions, where they were roughly going, and whether it be budget, time, you never know in any of these things. And I'm not naive enough or dumb enough to be like, oh my god, these lazy developers, because I'm one of them. I understand what it's like to have things just cut right at the last minute or not being able to represent it in the correct way. Hellblade is a great one of mental health. I will say in Hellblade 2, there were definitely things that I pitched that didn't get the green light, and not actually anything wrong, but I wish they would have, just so I could have shown more of the mental health in a different way. But again, it's hard to nail that is both respectful, representative, and engaging. I don't want to even use the word fun, because you're probably not looking for the word fun there, right? But engaging in terms of like really gripping the players. So balancing that kind of trifecta, I've definitely not drawn a triangle, whatever. But balancing all of them is really, really tough. And I would have loved to have seen them be able to do that more systemically versus a lot of it is narratively. Because the phone, man, I forgot to even mention, there's so much time you're using the phone, but I would have loved to see more of that. How you use that, I think there's a lot of different interesting ways that people have used phones in video games. Mobile games, I've seen some really great horrors with mobile games. I think there's some, I wish I remember the name, but it's like 2014, this horror where it's like you access someone's phone, going through messages, getting different calls, different voice messages, is incredibly well done. So I would have loved to seen that as a different one. But again, I imagine budget and time frame for it would have been tough. Do you know what? I think I could go on for a lot longer, but I think I'm just kind of rambling now. But what I'm really wanting to say with this is do check it out. It is a short experience. I'm not saying it's the best one in the world. And if you're going to, I think it's even free on PSN right now. So yeah, no excuses. And what I'm trying to say is, and a lot of people talk about like, oh, this is why it's important to play bad games. This is not a bad game. This is just not a perfect game. It's a good game. But again, it's easy. It's really cool to see it and then try pick and learn. And what would you do differently for it? So as I said to you, how would you represent bullying? How would you use, once you play the game, these mechanics to try do that? And I think it's one worth talking about. And I guess, again, especially the messages that it's sending out about like bullying, home trauma, and how we work on it. Because even now, right, I think like we talked about, Hellblade does a great job with it. There's many others that do a good job now of representing mental health. But no one's necessarily showing how do you not actually solve it, because there's some things like psychosis that can never be cured, but become more manageable. But we're on about traumatic experience here. What can we do to actually be able to address it and live with it? There has been people that I've met who have sadly been victims of abuse. And it is a horrifying thing that you can see affect them in many different ways. And I think therapy is very, very important for everyone, regardless if you don't think you need therapy. I think it can be very vindicating. It can be very helpful and liberating. So I'd love to see how do we handle that as well when we're talking about these kind of mental, more horror-focused games. So yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this kind of little ramble for it. I really, really wanted to talk about it. I think it's been such a fascinating game to see. I'm currently going through Silent Hill 2 now, actually. But do play it. If you've got any comments on it, maybe you want to talk about, maybe you can share what your thoughts would be, please do down below. I'll see you all soon. Take care. Enjoy the spooky season. And I'll catch you all next time.